The storm had crept in without warning, dark clouds blanketing the sky by late afternoon. John squinted through the pounding rain at the snakes of asphalt unfurling behind their swerving car. Beside him, Emily murmured a prayer under her breath, fingers gripping the handle above the passenger window like a lifeline. "Any ideas where we can wait this thing out?" John called over the downpour. His friends crammed in back. Mark, Allison, and Steve shook their heads silently. They hadn't seen another vehicle for miles on the deserted country road. A flash of lightning lit up the gloom ahead, and John swore, "What the hell is that?" Emerging from the shadows was a sprawling structure that seemed to hulk against the encroaching storm, its roofline jagged into the black sky like broken teeth. As they pulled up with a squeal, everyone stared at the looming edifice. Most of the windows were empty sockets. Shingles were scattered across a weed-choked lawn. A neglected sign identified it, the Bennett Hotel. "Think anyone's here?" asked Steve warily. John exhaled slowly. "Doubt it, but we need shelter till this passes." "Let's check it out." Maglite beams sliced through the driving rain as the five splashed towards a rotting front entrance. The doors creaked obligingly, but released a musty smell within. Impenetrable shadows engulfed the cavernous lobby ahead. "Hello," called John, voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. No reply came. Exchanging nervous glances, the friends progressed into the vast space. Their torchlight revealed a receptionist's desk, buried under rubble, a dust-laden map on the wall. A grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, face veiled by cobwebs. "Spooky." Allison aimed her beam around tensely. Why would anyone abandon a place like this? Mark crouched near the rubble, examining an object. "Guys, look. It's an old registration book." He brushed grime off the leather cover and cracked it open carefully. Pages crumbled at his touch. Peering over his shoulder, Steve read an entry aloud. "John and Mary Smith. Room 12. No dates, though." "Creepy." Emily shivered. "We should find somewhere dry and wait this out." "What do you think, John?" Their leader nodded thoughtfully. "Floor plans. Over here. Let's see if we can track down a room with beds still intact." They climbed decrepit stairways, hackled with cobwebs, winding higher through the gloom. Water stains spiderwebbed across peeling wallpaper. On the third landing, a door slammed shut somewhere, echoing through the hollow halls like a gunshot. Everyone froze. "Wind draft," said John, tightly after a beat, though unease lingered in his eyes. They hastened down a long corridor where thick shadows pooled between flickering beams. Stopping before a weathered door, Mark announced, "Room 12." He tried the knob tentatively. With a groan, the door yawned inward to reveal a cavernous chamber thick with must. Shelves, swaying cobweb vines were bare, while a gaping fireplace gaped in one wall. A sagging four-poster bed faced the boarded window reluctantly. "Dibs." Steve leapt onto the bed without a second thought, testing it cautiously. To their dismay, it held. The others filed inside more warily, tracking torch beams across the peeling walls. "I'll get a fire going," said John, laying kindling in the hearth, diligently as the rain hammered outside and winds keened through the eaves. Soon flame tongues licked welcomingly in the fireplace as the friends gathered around its glow. But none could shake the sense that unseen eyes watched from the dark recesses of the old hotel. The storm had cut them off from the outside world, leaving them trapped in this creepy relic from another era. And something told them this shelter was anything but safe. "So, who do you think the last guests were?" asked Allison, breaking the strained silence as they warmed themselves before the crackling fire. No one replied at first until Steve ventured, "Don't know." But whoever they were, they never checked out. Emily swatted his arm, eyes wide. "Knock it off, Steve. This place gives me the creeps enough as it is." Rolling his eyes, the latter stretched out on the dusty bedspread with hands behind his head, apparently untroubled. Mark fidgeted nearby, gaze roving their shadowy surroundings restlessly. A crash of thunder shook the walls, making them jump. In its wake, a strange vibration seemed to hum through the floorboards, like the building itself was awakening from a long slumber. Mark shot to his feet, staring around wildly. "Did you feel that?" John stood up slowly, brow furrowed. Must be the storm messing with the structure. Old places can act weird. But unease lingered in his eyes as the friends crowded closer to the fire, uncertainty. After a while, Allison began to hum tunelessly, a nervous habit. The shrill sound grated on frayed nerves in the tense silence. Beside her, Emily had huddled into a tighter ball, shooting looks toward the door as though tempted to flee back into the storm. Only Steve seemed unbothered, snoring lightly. A faint noise outside made them all freeze, holding their breath. From somewhere deep below, it almost sounded like stifled sobs drifting up the air vents before fading again. Goosebumps prickled everyone's skin. Rats, probably," whispered Mark hoarsely without conviction. He sank back down, fiddling with his flask, hoping for Dutch courage from the dregs. No one dared move as they strained their senses into the ominous dark. A heavy feeling pressed upon them, as if from watchful eyes lurking unseen through the gloom. Strange things seemed just a bit colder all of a sudden. And were those shadows along the wall deeper, more solid than before? Emily broke the taut silence, her voice high and strained. "John, can't we just get back in the car and wait this out? I don't feel safe here." Everyone glanced at their stoic leader, hoping for reassurance. But doubt haunted John's eyes now too as he scanned the endless night pressing at the windows. Whatever hidden menace dwelled inside this decaying hotel, it seemed to be awakening all around them, seeping into their minds. And for the first time that evening, leaving no longer seemed like an option. They were trapped here with it, at the mercy of whatever dreadful secrets still lingered in these crumbling walls after all these years. The night had only just begun, as dawn's pale light hesitantly filtered through grimy windows. The friends stirred from fitful dreams. The storm still raged outside, battering the hotel with torrential force. In the grate, ashes were all that remained of last night's fire. Rubbing sleep from bleary eyes, Allison noticed Emily sitting ramrod straight in a corner, clutching her knees like a frightened child. "Yeah? You okay?" The latter started violently at her name before nodding jerkily, but dark circles bruised her haunted gaze. Checking his phone fruitlessly for signal, John muttered, "Power's still out. Guess we're stuck here a while." Steve stretched luxuriously on the rumpled bed like a contented cat. "No problem for me. This place has character." An exasperated Mark shoved past him toward the door. "I'm gonna see if I can find the generator. Get some power and lights back on. Anyone wanna come?" Allison rose immediately, eager to escape the gloom of their chamber. "I'll help look. Emily, want to join us?" Their friend shook her head mutely, not taking her eyes from some fixed point in the distance. John frowned thoughtfully. "Be careful, you two, and try to stick together. Steve, you coming? The latter waved him away, rolling over casually. "You kids have fun, exploring. I'll be here if you need me." Following Mark's flashlight, anxiously, Allison and John exited into the eerie corridor. Cobwebs clung thickly to the mildewed walls, interrupted by the occasional decomposed carcass of some long-dead rodent. Crumbly plaster rained from the ceiling in places. They crept downstairs, feet stirring puffs of dust at each step. Peering into abandoned rooms, Allison glimpsed sagging four-poster beds similar to the one in theirs, dust sheets draped over indistinct lumps. Cold fingers seemed to trail her spine as she hurried to catch up to the boys, jumping at creaks and groans from the ruined innards of the hotel. In the cavernous ballroom, Mark halted, shining his torch around the expansive space, contemplatively. Generators probably in the basement. He swung the beam toward a shadowy alcove and started. "What the hell?" Allison hurried to his side, breath catching at the dark stain, marrying the threadbare carpet where his light spilled over. It looked horribly like decades, old blood splatter, frozen into the fabric. "Is that?" She couldn't complete the question, unwilling to believe the implications. Mark swallowed hard, hands trembling slightly as he tracked the beam around the room in wider arcs now. Other anomalies seemed to emerge from the gloom. Long gouges in the wallpaper, as if scored by frantic fingernails. A broken pendant glimmering starkly on the floor. Pieces of shattered crockery littering a far corner. They backed onto a landing overlooking the deserted lobby, repelled yet unable to tear their eyes away from the horror. Story clues left behind. "The hell happened here?" Allison whispered shakily, gripping Mark's arm. Before he could respond, a plaster shard dropped from overhead with a soft plop, as if signaling their discovery. All at once, the murmuring they hadn't realized had been lingering at the edge of hearing rose abruptly in volume, a wordless keening that seemed to fill the hollow spaces of the hotel impatiently. They bolted as one, pelting pell-mell, back up the stairs with the wailing vibration seeming to lash at their heels. Bursting breathlessly into their room, they found John crouched by the hearth, striving unsuccessfully to coax flames from the cold grate. Steve looked up lazily from where he sprawled on the bed. "Well, you two look like you've seen, His jest was cut short by Allison's urgent tone. "We have to get out of here, now." Then she recounted their unsettling finds in barely audible whispers, as Emily shot upright, wide eyes pleading silently in the background. "The pickup," said John steadily after a long pause. "We'll make a break for it, through the storm. Maybe get a signal on higher ground to call for help. Let's go." But as they emerged once more into the gloomy corridor, an unnatural cold seemed to descend upon the old hotel, biting through clothes and skin to their marrow. Mist began coiling thickly along the floor, sneaking between their legs as light fixtures flickered erratically above. And somewhere, that quiet wailing continued to rise and fall mournfully in the distance. Something knew they were trying to flee its domain. Bursting through the creaking front doors at a run, what little light remained was failing, the world vanishing into a faceless gray. Tendrils of fog writhed ahead malevolently. They splashed across the weed-choked lawn, scarcely seeing each other through the pea soup shrouding the grounds. Flash of lightning illuminated skeletal trees, clawing at the roiling clouds before darkness crashed in once more. In its wake, a blurred shape seemed to materialize amidst the fog, lurching heavily towards them with an ominous wheezing. The friends skidded to a halt, huddling back to back and brandishing fallen branches tensely as adrenaline surged. "Steve," whispered Allison fearfully into the gloom, but only the pattering rain and their racing heartbeats responded. Another arc of lightning cast the apparition into stark relief. A gaunt, spectral form, dragging one leg, arms outstretched rigidly as dripping jaws gaped wide in a silent scream. With hoarse cries, the friends scattered as it lurched towards them, tripping over gnarled roots, invisible in the pea soup murk. Crashing blindly through the trees, they pelted towards where the car hopefully still waited, praying the thing wasn't following. Bursting from the tattered edges of the woods at last, they staggered towards the vehicle, thankfully intact, only to shriek in unison as lightning flashed again. A dark shape clung, gibbering to the hood, pounding frenzied fists against the windshield, twisted features contorted into a rictus of agony. As they recoiled in horror, rising tendrils of fog seemed to curl protectively around the vehicle, obscuring it once more as an ear-splitting scream ripped the night. Then nerve shattered. Turning as one, they bolted desperately back into the brooding trees and swirling vapor, pursued now by unseen horrors that prowled just beyond sight through the ebony walls of mist closing in around the estate. After what seemed an eternity, stumbling blindly through that seemed nightmare realm, recalling at last the imposing silhouette of the hotel looming ahead through the chaotic storm, the friends scrambled back towards its creaking embrace, no longer caring about the mysteries and terrors within. Compared to the malevolent entities prowling the grim woods, at least indoors, there were walls and a roof between them and whatever lurked out in that veil of pea soup fog. Bursting back into the vacant lobby like a covey of frightened quail, they collapsed as one, hyperventilating and clutching each other for comfort against the unknown, encroaching outside once more. Their ordeal had only just begun. The haunted edifice that was once their refuge had become a trap, and some instinct warned that the malevolent force stirring within did not take kindly to interrupted prey venturing from its domain. Whatever malevolent force owned this decaying wreck after dark, they were now very much guests, unwelcome. In the belly of the beast, the true nightmare was only beginning. As dawn's pale light hesitantly filtered through grimy windows, the friends stirred from fitful dreams. The storm still raged outside, battering the hotel with torrential force. In the grate, ashes were all that remained of last night's fire. Rubbing sleep from bleary eyes, Allison noticed Emily sitting ramrod straight in a corner, clutching her knees like a frightened child. "Em, you okay?" The latter started violently at her name before nodding jerkily, but dark circles bruised her haunted gaze. Checking his phone fruitlessly for signal, John muttered, "Power's still out. Guess we're stuck here a while." Steve stretched luxuriously on the rumpled bed like a contented cat. "No problem for me. This place has character." An exasperated Mark shoved past him toward the door. "I'm gonna see if I can find the generator, get some power, and lights back on. Anyone wanna come?" Allison rose immediately, eager to escape the gloom of their chamber. "I'll help look. Emily, wanna join us?" Their friend shook her head mutely, not taking her eyes from some fixed point in the distance. John frowned thoughtfully. "Be careful, you two, and try to stick together. Steve, you coming?" The latter waved him away, rolling over casually. "You kids have fun exploring. I'll be here if you need me." As Mark and Allison departed into the winding corridors once more, Emily's panic seemed to infect the others like a disease. John watched Steve resume his lazy lounge on the bed restlessly, fingers drumming an agitated rhythm against the damp wall. "What is it, Johnny boy?" Steve glared sideways. "Got something to say?" Their leader shook his head, troubled. Just feel like we're being watched, you know? He nodded knowingly, but said nothing more as Emily shivered silently in her corner, fixing him with a soul. Deep plea for reassurance he didn't feel able to provide. Allison and Mark's return only heightened the coiled tension. We couldn't find the generator anywhere, hissed Allison breathlessly, rubbing chalky dust from arms caked to the elbow. But we heard things. Voices. Emily scrambled to her feet with a gasp, striking the damp wall feverishly. See, I told you. We're not alone here. It wants us trapped till we go mad. Wow. Take it easy. Steve held up his hands mock, placatingly before turning to Mark. Where'd you really go, lover boy? Make a few detours to fondle Allie in the dark. The implications ignited Mark's fleeting temper. Screw you, man. We just want to get the hell. His retort died as straining ears caught another low reverberation, echoing faintly through the bowels of the ancient inn. This one seemed almost melodic, like the mournful keening of an otherworldly chorus singing just below the threshold of hearing. Their eyes met in mutual dread. Some force was slowly but surely breaching the thin veil between realms, turning this spectral ruin evermore into its hunting ground, with each phantom crown, with each phantom cry, worming into ears and minds. Whatever mysteries lurked in the darker recesses were awakening, and not kindly. Night fell once more with the weary friends huddled in their barren chamber, muscles coiled tight as trigger springs. Under cover of inky darkness, amplified sounds took on new terrors, floorboards creaking under stealthy footsteps, raspy breathing in the hall, a disturbingly childish giggle drifting from somewhere far below. By midnight, with power still dead, nerves had worn paper thin. When Allison dropped her flashlight with an ear, splitting clatter, everyone jumped with twin yelps of shock and alarm until their laughter descended into hysteria, warnings to keep quiet, discarded like ashes on the biting wind, howling outside alone. Steve chuckled mirthlessly in the ensuing taut silence, nursing his flask again. Well, if we're all gonna die, may as well liven things up first. Anyone for truth or dare? The prospect of distraction, however slight, appealed to frayed minds craving normalcy. Even Emily listened despite herself as they huddled closer around Steve's proffered pipe, each dragging deep to share its fleeting comfort in the dark above the wailing of the restless hotel. Under its influence and flickering firelight, paranoia blossomed into full conspiracy. I heard someone following me earlier, insisted Mark, eyes glittering strangely. Any of you see that freaky face in the window just now? Emily grabbed his arm with a sob. Mark, please, you're scaring me more. He laughed mirthlessly. Ain't me, girl. This place wants us good and terrified before the final act. Allison smacked his chest, chiding in lower tones. That's enough, Mark. We're all on edge. Steve, give him a dare to distract from. A blood-curdling scream cut the night, stifled almost instantly into a wet gurgle below their chamber. The friends clutched each other, choking on their own startled cries as icy fingers crawled their spines in the deathly hush, dragging on and on. Then, footsteps, stumbling, uneven, descending violently closer through unlit halls at a breaking run. With a crash, the rickety door flew open to reveal a wild-eyed figure silhouetted against the threshold. Steve, gasped John, incredulously as the man lurched inside, slamming and locking the door frantically behind with hands that glistened darkly in the guttering firelight. Steve collapsed onto the hard floor, gulping lungfuls of air. Something out there. He choked between pants, took Mark, dragged him into the dark, screaming, and Emily uttered a small, broken sound, hands clasped to her gaping mouth. Trembling violently, Allison lit a cigarette with shaking fingers, passed it to their friend in mute shock as his tale sank in. The thing that stalked these rotting halls had already claimed its first victim, and the old cogs of insanity creaked ever louder in their fractured psyches. With each ticking second, the night dragged on into a miasma of terror unknown. The last embers in the hearth sputtered out with a mournful hiss, plunging the friends into absolute, impenetrable darkness. No moonlight filtered past heavy storm clouds shrouding the night. Within the hotel, only Steve's labored breathing disturbed an ominous hush as the three survivors clung together in the impenetrable black. Moments sluggishly into an eternity, Emily spoke in barely a whisper. "John, what was that thing?" No response came but the boom of rain against ancient glass. "John," she reached out tentatively, fingers meeting only empty space. A spark of panic ignited in Allison's chest. "John, Steve." Her voice rose against her will into the abyss. No reply came, not even the faint sounds of breath. Instinctively, she grasped for Emily, clutching sweating palms desperately. "They're gone." As if in response, a delicate sigh whispered from the inky void. Emily screamed, scrambling backwards with such force, her skull cracked upon edged wall. "Please, no more." Her cry dissolved into ragged sobs. But the silence yawned heavier than before, mocking their fear. In its depths, Allison gradually became aware of other noises. The scurry of tiny claws upon decaying floorboards, as of clothes shifting just beyond the veil of sight. Ever louder voices whispered at the edge of reason, urging the girls to give in to madness. Time lost all meaning as anxiety consumed body and mind. When at last a noise penetrated, both jumped with gasps. A series of echoing knocks resonated through the floor, each thud pulling the last fragments of sanity farther from reach. The rhythm was familiar, upbeat, meant to deceive. It worked. Reason abandoned Emily as a grin split her tear-streaked face. It's Morse code, so's. They're alive. Before Allison could react, she sprang up and fled with a wild sob of relief. "Emily." "No," Allison pelted after as fast as blinding darkness allowed. The labyrinthine passages through her progress, every turn revealing only the void. From somewhere ahead, Emily's laughter echoed unnaturally, further descending into a madness unseen. Allison careened around a corner, colliding headlong into a soft mass. She recoiled with a scream, only to freeze as familiar fingers grasped her wrist in the pitch-black. "Shesh, it's me." John's calming tone anchored her fraying nerves. He tugged her along swiftly without explanation. Together they groped through the endless maze, following distant laughter warping ever more into agonized wails. The deeper they ventured, at last the sounds culminated in answer screech that sent us through Allison's veins. They burst into an open theater, breath catching at the scene illuminated by faint glow spilling from a broken wall sconce. Emily writhed upon the stage, limbs bent at unnatural angles as the specter of a beautiful woman straddled her heaving chest. Its talons sank deeper with each passionate kicks, drawing rivers of scarlet. Allison opened her mouth for a scream and found only dry rasping escaping. Beside her, John stood frozen as a statue. His face, when she recovered it from the grisly display, bore an expression not of horror, but rapt fascination. In that moment, Allison realized the true danger had nothing to do with specters of the dark. She backed away, foot catching on a loose board. It gave way beneath her weight, revealing a gaping maw into the Bowel Softy Hotel. As Allison windmilled helplessly over the edge, John's hand shot to grasp her wrist, only to keep sliding down into the velvet darkness that swallowed her with a graceful caress. Her descent was arrested by a rough surface rasping skin after an eternity, or perhaps mere moments. Allison patted around, finding herself lying upon it, worn stone steps spiraling endlessly into the heart of night. Faint scuttling and a manicatter drifted up from the unfathomable depths, urging her descent into abysmal madness. But survival instinct prevailed. Allison ascended laboriously in the dense fog of her own terror, feeling her way foot over foot through the impossible dark. After an aeon, her searching palms brushed splintered wood. The theater's trapdoor overhead, now tantalizingly out of reach. With her final reserves, Allison lunged upwards with a gritted cry. Fingers locked around her wrist once more, dragging her up and overthigen to the musty boards with a heave. Allison lay gasping, taking in John's familiar features now etched with concern rather than sadism. "We have to get out of here," Head rasped, helping her to feet. Unseen, the theater doors creaked agenibly shut behind them. John led the way through the oppressive dark with surer guard, one hand never releasing hers. Before long, a glimmer of lights flickered ahead. The lobby's ruined chandeliers, formerly dark. Allison peered around, apprehensively as they slowed. Only silent shadows awaited in the unnatural glow. "Circuit must have tripped Backen," John muttered, more to reassure himself. But Allison caught the underlying tremor in his voice, the muzzled panic racing beneath the calm exterior. This place had gotten into them both. Pried open doors better left shut. Now, with only the two left to face whatever slumbers within, Allison wondered if escape was still an option, or if they, like all before, were destined to vanish into the gray mists of the Bennett Hotel. Souls claimed by whatever malevolence haunted this cursed place forevermore. Dawn's pale light filtering through grimy windows found John and Allison huddled by a makeshift fire in the lobby, jumpier than sparrows. Neither had slept, listening for noises beyond their limited sphere of light amid debris, strewn ruins. As morning's glow strengthened sluggishly, Allison broke the strained silence. "John, what do we do?" Her eyes pleaded for reassurance, though he felt hollow inside. "I don't know. But we can't stay here. We have to find a way out." Rising on shaky legs, John extended a hand slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. Allison let him help her up, clutching his arm like a lifeline in the gloomy vastness. Together they began exploring the dilapidated lobby, prodding wreckage for clues or supplies with long branches scavenged from the entryway. Their search turned up only more mysteries. An antique doll smashed almost beyond recognition, a ledger filled with names dated back over a century. Pages adhered together where thin scarlet rivulets had dried between entries. Allison let the book fall with a shudder, avoiding John's troubled gaze. A creak interrupted the oppressive quiet as he shifted a fallen beam. John started, eyes widening at a narrow gap revealed in the collapsed flooring. He crouched cautiously, peering into inky blackness. "Allison, come look. I think I've found a way down." She squeezed in beside him warily. A rickety ladder descended precariously into the abyss. I don't know, John. What if it's a trap? His eyes shone in the gloom with fresh purpose. Maybe there are answers below, or another exit. We have to try. We need to find weapons, tools, anything to defend ourselves if needed. Just stay close to me, okay? John went first into the void, testing each swaying rung with care before nodding for Allison to follow suit. Her ascent was met with only echoing drips and their racing heartbeats, in the crushing dark. Eons seemed to pass before lights flickered on weakly ahead, revealing a new level of dilapidation. They picked their way through chaos below the hotel, buckled support beams, crumbling brick walls, papered with cobwebs, piles of debris, stirred to life with scurrying vermin. John's sweeping beam paused, briefly, on darker or irregular shapes, hastily obscured beneath shifting wreckage, silently cataloging fresh mysteries. Allison stopped abruptly, quivering finger pointed at a bright burst of color amid the monochrome landscape. As John crept near warily, orange petals wavered fitfully in some unfelt draft like an unnatural flower grown in hell. His breath caught. It was a child's shoe, vibrant threads unraveling where lace had been severed long ago by unseen teeth. A scuttling skittered nearer through the rubble. Both stiffened, glances darting wildly through beam, splayed shadows for the source. Dust showered from above as heavy footfalls shook the rotting floorboards directly overhead, measured yet frenzied, followed by a muffled blast that shuddered the very foundations. John seized Allison's hand, bolting blindly back towards the ladder. They scrambled frantically upward as choking clouds billowed down in their wake, punctuated by splintering crashes and inhuman shrieks of a new ferocity above. Emerging at last into the lobby through drifting gray veils, they collapsed, coughing, amidst the ruins, watching the settling mist through watering eyes for any sign of pursuit. Nothing emerged from the swirling eddies, obscuring the horrors concealed below. Only ragged breaths and racing pulses disturbed the abnormal stillness, as dawn's faint rays weakly penetrated the gloom once more, without answers, only fresh mysteries compounding their terror inside these haunted walls. Friends retreated silently to a vacated lounge, taking shelter behind its dense mahogany bar. Rummaging amid cobwebbed bottles revealed merely vintage spirits, untouched by time's passage. John sloshed a dusty draught between them, meeting Allison's stare with flinty determination across its amber surface. We keep moving. Search every crevice until we find a way out, or go mad, trying. He tossed back the liquor defiantly before shouldering their meager provisions with a grim set to his jaw. This place has taken enough. Now it's our turn. They prowled the ground floor methodically, prodding boarded windows and battered doors resignedly. Winding corridors seemed to elongate endlessly, twisting back upon themselves when not folding unseen passages from view entirely between the friends' circling paths. By dusk, tensions frayed to breaking. Movement flickered at the edge of sight down a branching hall, retreating before their stumbling pursuit. Allison cried out, grasping only cobwebs where flesh and blood should cling. John peered into the void uselessly, harried wits fleeing completely as a low susurration swelled distantly, mocking their fragile hold on sanity remaining. He spun with a start at her gasp, following her shaking arm extended towards a door, left slightly ajar where all others gaped defiantly. A mellifluous lilt escaped its breach, alluring and alien, beckoning investigation despite every instinct screaming danger. John knelt before the portal hesitantly, straining an ear towards its siren call resignedly. Only shadowed glimpses could be discerned through the narrow gap of what might once have been a grand parlor, now fallen into disuse and decay, matching the rest of the moldering establishment. Flickering lights danced upon peeling walls, as alluring music continued its otherworldly refrain from some unseen orchestrator, coaxing intrigue, despite rational policies deserted long ago. A crashing boom cracked the night, shaking loose, crumbling plaster from the ceiling in a choking cloud. Before it settled, heavy footfalls thundered down the corridor at a momentum neither could outrun. John seized Allison's wrist desperately, tugging her limp form towards the parlor's solitary refuge as the approaching force gained rapid. But the door had sealed itself fast against their escape, frame quivering under blows from without now, reduced the hall beyond to rubble. They backed, unseeing, into the Stygian recess as splinters rained around their retreating forms. The music crescendoed madly in mocking welcome, joined now by ragged panting and clicking contraptions that could only spell doom. Silence dropped like a guillotine blade where the parody of mirth had reigned moments prior, leaving pursuers and prey alone with their shuddering breaths and pounding heartbeats in the tomb-like hush. Somewhere in the encompassing black, cinder scratched against flint with a portentous hiss. Flame light flared to ghastly life, illuminating a hellish scene beyond their fevered nightmares. For in that sterile glow, the friends found themselves no longer alone, and whatever entity had tracked them this far had no intention of letting prey slip through twisted claws again so easily. Instead, the hunt had only just begun in earnest within these walls. Firelight fluttered fitfully, casting the parlor in a hellish glow. Allison cried out, stumbling backwards from the ghastly visage, mere inches before her own. A man stood frozen, limbs cocked at unnatural angles, while a head lolled obscenely to regard them with bulging, milky eyes. John stood rigid, breath condensing in the icy air. Stepping from behind the statuesque figure came another, indistinct beyond a sepulchral rasping emanating from somewhere within its depths. Bony digits clenched rusted implements that dripped viscous fluids, black as the grinning maw, gaping expectantly below. Allison whimpered, staggering against John for support as limbs turned to jelly. His eyes never left the encroaching horrors, calculating prey against predator in the manner of a cornered animal. At his back, crumbling, brick hinted at means of escape where wood had proven faithless, if only a diversion could be manufactured. With a guttural battle cry, John launched himself at the stuck, still cadaver, toppling it into the creature, lurking beyond with all his diminishing strength. Its brittle frame shattered upon impact, like kindling, spurring rotted dendrites into a frenzied lashing as chitinous chattering echoed from within mist-shrouded confine. Seizing Allison's hand, John plunged them into the writhing, viscous mound, interlocking the two horrors, trusting instinct alone to navigate the chaotic tumult towards a lone aperture, glimmering dully among the heaving aggregation. Bricks, rent and crumbled hastily under desperate fists, granting egress, scarcely a shoulder's breadth, into an adjacent cell whose contents brought fresh horrors. Allison clapped, shaking palms over her mouth to stifle a scream. Scraps of aged parchment adhered haphazardly to crumbling plaster, bore scrawled missives of madness in genres differing as handwriting styles, yet conveying shared themes of dreadful experimentation and violation enacted within these very walls, untold decades past. Before her eyes, words dripped and reformed agonizingly across the panes, coerced by some unfelt force resonating through centuries of unrest. "Allison, it knows my name." A sob escaped her maw. Unhindered, fingers clawing mindlessly at the oppressive cage of corpses and secrets as the parlor's cacophony swelled ravenously behind. John seized her flailing wrists instinctively, drawing haunted eyes towards his own fiercely. "We have to keep moving, Allie, for as long as we can. Stay close to me." He grasped a fallen board to bar their cell door temporarily against the encroaching tides of madness. Without, leading her stumbling passage through a labyrinth of abandoned patients' quarters, consumed entirely by the hotel's macabre clutches through the worm-eaten centuries. Within lay relics untold. Decaying medical implements stained sepia, bits of bones warping curiously between floorboards, browning drifts of brittle pages and photographs submerged below rising tides of dust and fevered dreams. Still, the scrawling missives persisted, worming ever deeper under brittle fingernails, as Allison scrabbled frantically through mentally barricaded doors, better left shut. John surveyed their crumbling surroundings calculatingly, willing purpose into fracturing resolve. Generators likely in the basement. Maybe we can get power back. Call for help. Come on, I think I see a way down. He pried warped boards, revealing precipitous darkness below, descending without hesitation into the bowels of the forsaken hotel and whatever secrets festered undisturbed within. Their meager light illuminated a warren of support beams and forgotten detritus, concealing horrors untold, frozen in flickering glow. Allison glimpsed fragments of lives cut cruelly short. A child's shoe nestled lovingly amid cobwebs, leathered spines of moldering diaries spilling guts of yellowed vellum, fragments of humanity lingering where none should in such a place. John halted abruptly, sweeping beam tracing outlines almost resembling huddled shapes, half buried under eons of dust and shadows. Allison crept nearer, hesitantly, prodding drifts, concealing forms, distorted yet hauntingly familiar. A glint of metal was unearthed, rusted, identification tag, twisting fitfully in unfelt eddies, bearing a name once belonging to a living soul. Mark, Emily, Steve. The tags shifted and reformed as John excavated more, bearing names from a century past yet mirroring their own doomed company, drawn to these walls. Allison choked back horror, scrabbling frantically aside until her sweeping palms impacted cold resistance beneath the final shroud. Two sightless orbits bored into her own, flesh slowed away, revealing grinning teeth in a rictus eternally haunting the very foundations of this cursed place. Allison recoiled with a keening wail, clawing vainly at close walls, seeming to constrict with each choking gasp. Somewhere, a generator spluttered weakly to life, illuminating dancing shadows, flocking ravenously towards fresh prey, trapped helplessly within the belly of the beast. John hauled her upright desperately, dragging limp limbs stumbling towards a dim portal materializing hazily through the heaving masses. Something was coming, summoning horrors dormant, untold decades to replenish wasting stores. After slumber, undisturbed, they had to move, had to hide, had to endure whatever terrors these lightless catacombs had in store, along whatever twisted path fate decreed through this waking nightmare. Escape was the sole memento of fading sanity, remaining as the hotel awakened ravenously once more. After centuries of dormancy, John and Allison stumbled blindly through the bowels of the hotel, borne on adrenaline and instinct alone, as chaos blossomed above. Around them, generators pulsed fitfully, illuminating fleeting glimpses of renewed movement, swarming the maze of support beams in a macabre waltz. Allison choked back, sickening realization that escape had never truly been an option. That fateful night storm, little more than orchestration, drawing fresh souls to replenish this place's fuel for the slumbering evils, stirring once more from centuries of dormancy. Now, they were but playthings, in the hands of powers unknowable, herded towards some grim denouement, decreed long ago. John seized her wrist desperately, dragging limp flesh towards a cheerless portal materializing in the heaving press. They tumbled through tangible night into a solitary cell, slamming the barrier behind with finality against the roiling tides beyond. Only then did raw willpower abandon him, collapsing amidst the filth and fighting racking sobs. Allison crawled numbly to his side, icy fingers carding gently through tousled locks in silent fealty. Survival had transcended into defending the sole spark of life and vigor remaining, however briefly, against consuming despair. A wandering touch grasped shivering flesh, stilling to trace symbols upon his heaving back, letters forming reassuring missives despite weakness of flesh. Hope, friend, fight. Slowly, John's gasping stilled. Though tremors lingered beneath her touchstone, he grasped cold digits lightly in silent gratitude before straightening with grim determination, stealing into hollowed features once more. Come, help me search. There may be answers or means of defense, yet within these walls, long buried. Hollow-eyed, Allison assisted, turning over countless relics in flickering dark, moldering books spilling eldritch secrets untold decade past, sealed packets of herbs and powders connoting rituals best left dormant, fragments of lives violently truncated within these very environs, before malice turned fully inwards. Her questing fingers brushed parchment smoother than time alone could account for, tracing embossed symbols along its leathered cover with inexplicable familiarity. Allison withdrew a battered tome, flipping through brittle pages, sparking recognition and portents beyond comprehension. Its contents hinted at esoteric rites, capable of summoning or binding entities across the veil for mortal ends, whether benevolent defense or malicious designs. Handwritten notes, scrawled desperately in margins, pleaded to unseen powers for surcease from some nameless torment stalking these halls, slipping inevitably into ranting gibberish as sanity deserted the supplicant. A draft whispered through close quarters as Allison lingered, transfixed upon revelations untold. Behind her, John crouched tensely, brandishing a rusty implement as torchlight flickered erratically through small apertures, exposing their prison to whatever malignancy prowled ceaselessly beyond bars. The storm had broken at last, unveiling a midnight sky host to prowling predators beyond number, swirling in from the surrounding woods and fields, drawn inevitably to this place's pulls. Their eerie chorus swelled ravenously with each rattling gust, drowning out Allison's gasp as parchment drifting from nerveless fingers rearranged of its own volition. The words coalesced anew, spilling secrets to barter remaining life and liberty for surcease from gathering terrors. A blasphemous rite was detailed to bind and direct unrest, scintillating these halls to defenders' bidding, if the strength and will endured to control forces beyond mortal ken. Strength they had little left of. Yet surrender meant becoming but playthings in the hands of festering malice preparing fresh wickedness this night. Choice was an illusion, as was hope. Yet defiance was all that remained when all else faded into the primal will to endure. However briefly, the looming darkness, together in the solitary fire of their twin souls burning fiercely still against the dying of the light, John and Allison resolved to enact the eldritch rite and damnation if need be, to wrest command from whatever force animated these crumbling walls, or die attempting with every ember of resilience left in their battered frames. The final confrontation was nigh, and fate would be challenged to its depths within these infernal halls before dawn, if it ever came again. Preparations were meager, but methodical. Allison daubed sigils upon crumbling walls as John gathered implements, lengths of rusty piping, shattered glass, an antique scalpel gleaming dully in flickering torchlight. Together, they enacted the ritual, detailed in moldering tomes, voices rising in unison over the tenant's ominous chorus, swelling beyond bars without end. As the final incantation echoed into fathomless dark, an icy presence descended upon the close quarters with palpable malevolence. The friends huddled anxiously, weapons aloft, waiting for some manifestation. When it came, horror far surpassed guesses. A sepulchral groan resonated through foundations, trembling dust from warped rafters, as the entire structure lurched subtly upon corrupted soil. All at once, unnatural screams cascaded endlessly from every level and angle, drowning coherence in an agonized tumult of souls condemned to these halls for untold centuries. Hostility and madness distilled into a chord so pure it fragmented mortal minds upon contact. John and Allison collapsed reflexively, clapping bloodied hands over tortured ears against the maddening chorus, raging endlessly from beyond the abyss. In its depths, voices could be discerned lifting from the maelstrom, familiar tones twisting blasphemously in torment, designed to corrode the final vestiges of humanity within. The ritual had failed, instead backfiring into an unbinding dropping veil between realms entirely. Raw, undiluted malevolence cascaded freely into their realm without anchors or limits, capitalizing upon festering corruption, grinding mortal souls, inevitably to matching ruin over endless ages. All rationale, mercy and home, departed on keening gales, abandoning two-framed souls to dissolution within an unmaking beyond time. As consciousness dissolved into the shimmering void, ghastly revelations filtered through, of entities slumbering since primordial eras awakening voraciously to assets undreamed, lives severed, untrained, lives severed, untold eons past, rising ravenous and unchecked. John knew sanity to be a fleeting ember guttering against the primal tides of wrath and decay, soon to engulf all lingering defiance, utterly. His frantic cries went unhearing amid the pandemonium corroding sense and self and world alike into lifeless chaos. Only Allison's failing touch upon his brow remained to anchor, clinging remnants of identity against the astral cataclysm, devouring reason and hope equally. Unfailing light gave strength to utter a final invocation, not for binding, but separation, to erect whatever barrier remained between their fraying souls and the unconquerable tides about to engulf this reality entirely. Will alone sustained the incantation against the unopposable maelstrom, seeking to grind the final embers to ash. As comprehension dissolved into the roaring abyss, awareness lingered of salvation, wrought from defiant defiance against oblivion, of their frames becoming but anchors tethering receding identities from consummation. In the yawning void left after malice, rent veil and world asunder, two twinned souls, yet endured, however feebly, beyond annihilation's event, horizon through agony and chaos, scrabbling inevitably to erode the remnants of humanity, lingering against the dying of all light. Then, silence, deeper than abyss itself. Consciousness faded into tangible night as a hush dropped upon the shattered remnants of a world. Slowly, awareness returned like resin filtering through fractured panes. Glimpsing an exterior long abandoned, John raised his aching head, stiffly from cold flags, filmed with ash, finding Allison curled limp and yet breathing raggedly beside where aged bricks crumbled imperfectly to reveal vista of wood and shadow once more. They had endured the unmaking, yet remnants lingered tangible as ruin swirling where entity and edifice had merged through the ages. Beyond the aperture, woodland slumbered draped in mists dissolving reluctantly, at dawn's first strengthening fingers, caressing the horizons. Survival was a frail flicker, yet guttering in their hands. Yet the threat remained visceral amid decaying foundations, gradually relinquishing hold upon a realm, not its own. Dawn was breaking, and with it, a potential for escape, or a final confrontation to secure fate of this, or any realm. The end was nigh upon the haunted halls of Joel Bennett, once and for all, for good or ill. Dawn's pale light filtered through the aperture, illuminating Allison's still form curled amid the ruins. John crawled to her side urgently, pressing trembling fingers to her throat and sighing in relief at the faint yet steady pulse beneath clammy flesh. Her eyelids fluttered weakly at his touch, gazing up with a hollowness, echoing his own. Survival was a frail spark, guttering in their hands now, sustained only by the primal will to endure, however briefly, and defend the last remnants of humanity from the malevolent forces stirring hungrily within these crumbling walls once more. Together, they rose unsteadily, leaning upon each other for support against the encroaching shadows. John grasped a jagged length of piping, Allison a rusted scalpel, glinting dully in the pallid light, and turned to face the yawning void of the cell. Whatever entities prowled these halls had been unbound, in full, sloughing restraints of flesh and will. The final confrontation was at hand. A susurration swelled from the bowels of the hotel, joined by the patterning of innumerable feet scuttling ceaselessly upwards through the foundations. John steeled himself, readying a battle cry to sell their lives dearly against the tides of madness soon to engulf the upper levels. But before a sound escaped, Allison's fingers tightened upon his arm in warning. Figures had materialized beyond the bars, indistinct amidst the gloom. One detached itself fluidly from the press, gliding nearer with a grace at odds with the ruin enclosing it. Pale light, illuminated features, hauntingly familiar, yet subtly altered, as if glimpsed across an abyss of untold centuries. "Mark," Allison whispered brokenly. He smiled gently, extending a hand in invitation between the bars. "Come, it's over now. Time to rest." John shook his head mutely, backing away. This was no salvation, only fresh torment devised by malice, sloughing all restraint. As if sensing his resolve, Mark's features rippled subtly, exposing glimpses of the entity lurking beneath momentarily, before composure resettled like a mask. "Please, we only wish to embrace what was taken so long ago." Soft words belied the horde massing hungrily in surging shadows beyond. "Stay, and all pain will fade into blissful oblivion. Resist, and all pain will fade." And a bestial shriek rent the night as something lunged ravenously from the press. Mark staggered backwards with an inhuman howl, form warping into a nightmare amalgam as claws raked flesh, yielding only ichor black as the pits. In seconds, it was consumed by the roiling tide, vanishing without a trace as the horde turned as one, towards the cell with a hunger centuries in the making. John seized Allison's wrist, bellowing a primal battle cry, and charging headlong into the seething mass. Their makeshift weapons lashed out desperately, eliciting unearthly shrieks where blades bit deep, yet doing little to stem the tide. Allison was torn from his grasp almost instantly, disappearing beneath flailing limbs and gnashing jaws, hungry to rend flesh from bone. With a guttural roar of fury and loss, John fought like a cornered animal, feeling tendons and cartilage parting beneath his blows, yet numbers swiftly overwhelmed through superior force, bearing him to the floor under a flailing morass seeking to drown his final defiance in viscera. Through a haze of blood, he glimpsed Allison's limp form, being dragged away, and knew this to be the end of a life spent defying the darkness in all its guises. As consciousness faded, a glimmer caught his fading sight. The journal, pages fluttering fitfully amid the ruins as words rearranged of their own volition once more. In that moment, a spark of hope kindled against the dying of the light as fragments of ritual and invocation drifted through the surf of oblivion, recalling secrets to challenge fate itself in the final moments. With his last embers of will and strength, John began to speak. A susurration swelled as the horde paused, twisting as one towards the fallen man. Tendrils of mist coalesced upon his heaving chest, coiling protectively as words of power continued spilling hoarsely past bloodied lips. The hotel shuddered subtly upon its foundations as a presence stirred, sloughing the last vestiges of flesh, long dead and rising in full. All at once, the horde recoiled with inhuman shrieks, forms warping and dissolving upon the threshold of the cell. A figure materialized amidst the chaos, extending a withered hand to help John rise unsteadily once more. Recognition dawned through the haze of agony and loss. "Emily. Emily." She smiled gently, gesturing beyond the bars, now vacant but for swirling shadows, rapidly dissipating under the entity's baleful gaze fixed upon these halls at last. Allison lay curled and still amidst the ruins, yet life flickered faintly within her broken frame. With Emily's support, John staggered to her side, gathering limp flesh tenderly into arms stained black with mingled ichor. Her eyes fluttered weakly open once more, finding solace in his hollowed gaze before flickering shut once more. Beyond, dawn's light was strengthening against the darkness, rays glinting upon rusted implements and fragments of lives left in these halls as mute testament to the hotel's long slumber. John turned to Emily with a question, finding only swirling mist, dissipating reluctantly upon ethereal currents. Her purpose was fulfilled, binding broken at last. Within, an unnatural stillness descended, where malice and madness once proliferated endlessly. The hotel's long torment had reached its conclusion, and with dawn's light banishing the final shadows, escape seemed possible at long last for the two souls left to endure whatever lay beyond these haunted walls. Their ordeal had come to an end within the ruins of Joel Bennett's infamous estate, and dawn of a new era was breaking after endless night. But what lay ahead in life or death for the survivors of its terrors remained to be seen. Dawn's light strengthened, banishing the final shadows from the hotel's ruins. John rose unsteadily, cradling Allison's limp form against his chest as he picked his way through the debris-strewn lobby towards salvation beyond. Emerging into pale morning, he halted at the threshold in awe. Where endless wood and storm had raged, now fields stretched golden to distant blue horizons. Not a trace of the hotel's brooding silhouette remained, only their footprints disturbed virgin meadows, stretching endlessly towards a placid sky. Somehow, they had endured the unmaking of worlds within those walls, surviving when all others vanished into the mists of time. Now only they remained, bearing scars that would haunt waking hours and dreams, for however long fate granted reprieve from the darkness. Allison stirred weakly, gazing up with hollow eyes, finding solace in his own. Together they began the long walk across the fields, putting distance between themselves and whatever evil still lingered where the Bennett Hotel had stood for so long, preying upon lost souls. With each step, wariness dragged heavier upon battered frames, yet defiance kept flagging feet, moving relentlessly onwards. Survival was all that remained. Fields eventually gave way to sloping woodlands draped in ethereal mists. John halted at the crest of a rise, gazing down upon a pastoral hamlet nestled cozily in the valley below. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys as figures moved among quaint homes, oblivious to the horrors endured by the two souls standing vigil above their simple lives, bearing scars that would never fully heal. A dirt track wound down toward salvation. John started forward, only to stagger as darkness encroached upon vision. Allison stirred weakly in his failing arms. "Sure, it's all right. Just a bit further." His final words faded into the mists as consciousness dissolved, bodies crumpling into long grass, perfumed faintly with memories of other lives and places. Voices swam through surf as awareness returned sluggishly. John pried open gummed lids to find unfamiliar faces hovering above, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "Call an ambulance. Call an ambulance," one exclaimed in relief upon noticing his revival. "Don't try to move. You're both badly hurt. Help is coming soon." Paramedics arrived swiftly, bundling the survivors onto stretchers to be rushed from that bucolic place. In the ambulance, Allison's fingers found his own limp flesh, squeezing faintly in silent communion as sirens wailed them towards a world left far behind within the moldering halls of Joel Bennett's infamous estate. Days passed in a haze of treatment and recovery. When lucidity returned fully, police questioned the pair gently, receiving only shaken heads and haunted gazes in response to inquiries about their ordeal. No words could convey the terrors endured within those walls. the scars born deep in soul rather than flesh. In time, even nightmares faded, memories blurring at the edges like a bad dream, half remembered upon waking. Weeks later, John stood vigil once more upon the rise overlooking that tranquil hamlet. Allison at his side. They gazed across emerald fields, stretching endlessly to blue horizons, finding only solace in each other's company. No trace of the hotel's brooding form marred the pastoral scene. Its malignancy dissolved utterly into the mists of time, like all nightmares must with dawn. Allison's fingers found his own, squeezing gently. "We survived," she whispered. "That's what matters now." He nodded, pulling her close as a breeze sighed through long grass, perfumed faintly with memories of other lives and places once endured, and darkness held at bay, if only for now, within their twin souls, kindled fiercely still against oblivion by defiance of fate itself, within the haunted halls of Joel Bennett so long ago. Their ordeal had come to an end at last, and dawn of a new era was breaking after endless night. But wherever evil lingers, hope yet remains to challenge the darkness, as long as even a single spark of life persists to defy the dying of the light.